Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Biggs, not Michael Blue. I'm with the City of Evanston, and welcome to our meeting. We're hosting this fourth Civic Center listening session tonight. Really excited to see everybody here. I am going to do a brief introduction to our listening session and talk a little bit about background information, and then I'm going to share the screen here. Michael Blue, who will do the main presentation. Just as a reminder that since this is an entirely virtual session, if you have questions, you can raise your hand or put your question in the chat, but we may not immediately stop and answer those questions. We may wait till a good stopping point in order to get your questions in. So with that, I will share the presentation.
Well, I'll do it.
Or Michael will.
Hold on just
Okay, hopefully everybody can see that presentation. We are going to do some interactive things later, and the QR code that you see is so that you can join in via your cell phone or computer. So welcome. Our agenda tonight, we're really going to be looking at really trying to understand what everybody's priorities are via City Hall and what we need to provide. Whatever we choose to do as we look at renovating or creating our new Civic Center, it is expensive. There's no doubt about it that there's a lot of work needed at both the existing building and if we do a new building, or even if we choose to rent space or lease office space downtown long term. And all of those things cost money. So what we're really trying to get at is, what do people want out of their City Hall so that we can understand how to best use funds to provide what is needed by the community. So for the past year or so, we have been evaluating options for renovating or relocating our City Hall and our police fire headquarters, working with a consultant, AECOM, who has partnered with Tesca Associates, a local Evanston firm, to really try to get a lot of background information together. So for a range of reasons having to do with ADA violations, building code issues, and also just the functionality of the space, our existing 2100 Ridge Civic Center really is not currently meeting our city needs. The HVAC and electrical systems are really in poor condition and need to be replaced, but also there are just a lot of challenges related to building code, ADA, security, as well as the fact that the building is significantly oversized and is inefficient in how it allocates space. So we end up paying for maintaining, heating, and cooling a much larger space than we would necessarily need for our own uses. So to that end, we did contract with AECOM to understand what are some of the relative costs as we move forward with different options for providing City Hall and police fire headquarters. So 6 options were presented earlier this year at a city council meeting. And the short story is that those options included renovating our existing Civic Center, renovating our police fire headquarters, or relocating that police fire to 2100 Ridge Avenue with our existing Civic Center, or relocating one or both to the downtown Evanston area. These options together for both buildings represented a range of costs from 120 to approximately 160 million. And unfortunately, although it's a little counterintuitive, the most expensive option is really the renovation for both facilities. Why is that? Well, unfortunately, as we talked about, there's a lot of challenges with our existing building and buildings. And in the case of the Civic Center, the building is historic. So preservation requires that we do our improvements in a certain way. But also because what started as, wow, the HVAC is in really poor condition and we need to replace it, But once we start looking at that, we have to bring the entire building up to modern day building codes. And for a building that was built in the early 1900s, that's a lot of things to address. That drives up the price. And so while we recognize that there's a lot of value to this building, it isn't ideal for our current uses. In the case of the police fire headquarters, all those things are true, but in addition, the building is significantly undersized for the operations that we have. And so we're really not able to effectively support our policing and fire staff, as well as deliver services to the community in the way that the community is requested because of the limitations of the facility. Now, when we say relocate downtown, that's a pretty big look at a wide variety of options. And for that reason, I want to go through those options and just talk about some of the things that have developed. When we say renovate the Civic Center at 2100 Ridge, it's much easier to envision, but our potential downtown options are pretty wide ranging. But even since AECOM first, our consultant, first took a look at what the downtown options are, things have really developed from our original presentation to the City Council. Where things stand currently, one option is 909 Davis Street, which is located in between the two train tracks and Church and Davis Street. Now, 909 Davis is a situation where the city is moving the City Hall to property that is, or office space that is leased within the existing building. That move is planned to take place early next year, so just a couple months from now. And that move is considered temporary. We do have a long-term lease, but there's an opt-out at 7 years. And it would take us a good amount of time, regardless of what we're doing, to develop a project and do the renovation or new construction necessary for us to create a final civic center. And that's the reason for the 7-year opt-out. There are other options, however. 1703 Orrington is our existing library site. I'm sure that many of you have been to our main library. That building was built in the 1990s. It is in need of a significant $20 million renovation just to house the library services. However, the library has been changing the way that they offer services over the years. And their current thinking is that really they don't need the entire building. They really just need 2 of the 4 floors. It turns out that the available space is not that different than from the needs of our City Hall operations. So to that end, it is definitely a viable option for the city to consider moving the City Hall only to coexist in the existing main library building. Now, if the main library renovation is $20 million, it would be substantially more if we were planning to move the City Hall offices there. However, probably not as much as renovating the existing building that the City Hall is in or building a new building. That is a cost that we are going to look into. Another option is 1801 Maple Avenue, which is shown as building number 3 on our slide. This building is directly across the street from the Maple Avenue garage on the northeast corner, across from where Chili's is located also. This building is owned by Northwestern University. If you've seen our previous presentations earlier this year, you saw that we identified a number of Northwestern University properties that would be great options for the city to move downtown. We have asked Northwestern about these properties, and after further discussions with them, the property that they feel is most favorable for their operation and actually could work pretty well for ours is to rehab this laboratory building that is really not being used to its fullest and best use by Northwestern. We have not worked a deal with them yet, but when we look at it, the building's actually a really good fit for our police fire headquarters. And so that is something that we are continuing to investigate with NU as a partner. Finally, fourth option, building number 4 here, is 900 Clark Street. And this is the north end of the theater, the movie theater building that is located across the street from Maple Garage. That was originally a Century Theater. It's now was sold and is now an AMC theater. The developer that purchased it recently is interested in developing the north end of the building as housing. And to that end, however, they have approached us about potentially using the first 4 or 5 floors at ground level to be a city hall, a sort of an anchor tenant, with then housing, residential housing units located on the upper floors. Working with them, we have shared our program, our preliminary program for City Hall services, and looked at what they are offering. And they have estimated a price at around $40 to $50 million to offer this service. We are also investigating options, whether we would have a partial ownership of the building or whether it would be more of a leased situation. So none of these are settled. We're providing them merely to show you that there are actually quite a lot of different varieties of things that could be placed downtown, but all 4 of these options are very real choices that could work quite favorably for the city. We've vetted them enough to know that they would work in a long-term situation. At this point, I'm actually going to turn it over to Michael Blue of Pesca Associates. Pesca has been partnering with AECOM, and they have been working with us to develop this presentation, as well as the study that has gotten us to where we are today. So with that.
Thank you, Laura. So what we have in mind for the rest of the evening is to mostly listen to you all, those of you that have joined us online. And so we'll get to this in just a minute, but just by way of preview, you should see a QR code on the left side of the screen. If you either want to scan that QR code with your phone or use your phone to go to the website that is listed down there, ahaslides.com. It'll ask you for that sign-in code. You can do that. We're going to do a little bit of live polling as we move forward. But first, we want to talk about what are the objectives of these listening sessions and our polling and what we're doing here tonight. Laura's given a great background about how we got here and about what the options are for a city hall. But what we want to talk about is the step before that, which is to develop an understanding of how community members engage with their city government. How do you use City Hall? What are the residents' priorities for City Hall services and amenities? And by understanding those in the context of the city's broader needs, there are other priorities, there are trade-offs for making these decisions. We want to understand that, put that information together as an understanding of community information and share it with the city council so that as they make these decisions, they'll have feedback from the community. So the first part of that is to understand that city halls have changed. City halls, traditionally, they were about resident services and all the municipal offices. Some of them had a courtroom or an adjudication room where people would deal with code enforcement or tickets or that sort of thing. They would be available for public meetings, whether they were small group meetings or city council meetings. And some of you may have used City Hall for any or all of those. But what we have seen in communities all around in recent years, certainly since the Civic Center was started to be used in the 90s, is that city halls are very different now. They may include gathering spaces or park spaces. They may be about events. They may have other uses. And the other thing that has absolutely changed the way we use all services, not just government services, is what's available online through the internet and how much business that you used to maybe have to go into a city hall to use, that now you have to, or you have the option of doing from the comfort of your home through your phone. And so, what can a city hall be? And we just popped some examples up here on this slide. I'm certainly not going to go through them, but the idea is that a city hall can be a lot of things. It's not just an office building anymore. And so the idea is to understand how people want to use their city hall and to share that as part of this analysis. So some pictures, some plans about what city halls can and could be, And all we're trying to do here is to show you that there's just a wide range. We're not looking tonight to talk to you about exactly where the city hall should be. We're not looking to pick any of the sites that Laura talked about. We're not trying to make a decision on the disposition of 2100 Ridge. That's all coming. Those are very important discussions and they will happen. But tonight we want to take that step back, as I said, and talk about how do we use government services. So with that, what we want to do is go to the AHA slides. So again, if you hadn't had a chance, either scan the QR code here or log on. And so we're going to start with this first question, which is effectively, what ward do you live in? And if you don't know, there's an option for don't know. And this is not about where the city hall is going to go, but this is about understanding where people who are responding live. First and 5. We have a small but mighty group here, so we're not going to get a ton of answers here, but we're going to use what we see as a little bit of a discussion. So that's great. Thank you for doing that one. How long have you lived in town? And the possible answers on your screen should have advanced. Okay. Well, there's only a couple of you participating, so the surveying is going to look like this, but it's going to be really good way to help us understand and walk through this explanation. I would let those of you that are online know that if you have any questions or comments, share them with the chat. We'll be tracking them, and if there's any we can answer, we certainly will. If not, if you have comments as we go, we definitely want to keep track of those as well. So the first question about how people use City Hall is, how many times have you visited City Hall? Okay, there's a range. As I said, this is one of the questions that we know the city's going to be evaluating, is how people use City Hall. So that's why it's on our list here. The other thing that we want to talk about is priorities, right? So if the city is going to spend money to do any of these improvements, which it is, the question is, where do the expenditure of those funds get focused? How do they get used? And so we've got a couple of questions that we want to walk through here and see your thoughts on. So, and this will let you select up to 4 choices, but what types of on-site features, services, amenities would you most value if they were part of a city hall? Again, whether renovated or new, and the options are along the bottom there. Having green space, having a plaza, someplace that's comfortable that people can meet, meeting rooms that could be available to the community, for instance, or to rent space for an event even, co-working space, which is helpful to people that are primarily working from home, recreation department and programs, so either using that office or those services, bike racks, if you're going to ride your bike there, free Wi-Fi, or dog friendly. Somebody asked us one of the other sessions about dog friendly, and the reality is there are a lot of buildings and restaurants now, that even restaurants that have the ability for people to come and visit with their pooches. So we're seeing some results, I would tell you, that are consistent with what we've heard from the other sessions that we've done in terms of people wanting to use meeting rooms. But the ideas that are also highlighted here about open space, plazas, and events is something that we're seeing kind of come out of this one a little bit. So that's an interesting bit of feedback. Thank you for that. This question is actually set up to let you type. So if there's something that was not on the list before, or something that you think are important in terms of other city services that was not on that other list, go ahead and type. And I'm pretty sure the system will let you do more than one. information. Mhm. Bills associated, all bills associated with Civic at a single location. Excellent. Good list. Free parking, central location, outside the downtown, near transportation, with rooms for not-for-profit meetings. I would tell you that the comments are consistent with what we've heard from others, particularly in regard to free parking and meeting rooms have come up in a number of our sessions. So that's a great add. Thank you. We'll pause here for a little bit because the screen tells me the participants are typing. So thank you very much for all this feedback. Minimize non-essential services. We've got another question that gets at that a little bit. All right, there's still typing going on, so we're gonna wait for the one more. Right, thanks for the comment about cost. And again, we've heard those comments from others and are going to be taking that into account as part of the overall decision when the council looks at it. So let's talk about priorities in terms of how funds should be expended. So for instance, as a city council in particular is considering how to go about this, there's a range of options, right? On the one side, on the left side of your screen, you see the idea of minimizing costs. Let's do this as, I don't want to say cheaply, but as cost effectively as possibly can be done. And then there's an idea of focusing on low cost options, or the idea of being balanced. Or the one on the far right side is one that talks about, you know what, invest for the long term. Let's spend the money that it takes so that the building lasts. And these are all options that come up. And the responses that you all have picked that are kind of in the middle are ones that we have heard in the previous session. So you're consistent with others. I'll tell you, we have seen the other options selected as well about minimize costs. Let's just do this as cost effectively as possible. And we've had some folks who made the case about, look, let's make sure that we do this in a way that we spend what the funds that are needed to make the building what we want it to be and include a range of services. But these two answers that you all have shared here are very much in keeping with what we've talked about before. So what we'd like to do next is to build on what we've talked about before and invite those of you that have joined us online into a Zoom room. And if you've never done this before, you don't have to do anything. The system will put you into a Zoom room. And we'd ask for you to work together in your breakout rooms to discuss priorities based on city council goals. And that'll be on the next slide. You'll be able to unmute yourself and chat as a small group. Take about 15 minutes to talk about the priorities. The point of this exercise is to understand what people in the community think about. Look, Laura talked about the cost that's related to renovating or finding a new civic center, a new city hall. But there are other priorities. There are other things that call for expenditures by the city. So we've got an exercise that'll come up that'll give you some options of other things that have been talked about in the city. We'd ask you to look at those. And if there are others, mention those at all. So the host will put you in. You can ask for help if you need it. And we'll ask that you be prepared to unmute yourself and share the group's reflections in about 15 minutes. So with that, these are the options that are going to come up in the exercise. And we'd ask you to look at these four and think in terms of how they might rank of how the city should expend funds. So with that,
Oh, there's a question in the chat.
oh,
How can you see that?
what's the question?
Question is that you advised that the cost is close to $120 million. And Brian would like to know, is that the cost for the Civic Center and the combined police and fire headquarters?
Yes, the question is that we advised $120 million. Is that just for the Civic Center or is that for police fire headquarters? And the answer is that is for both of those buildings together. The Civic Center by itself is estimated around $63 million. That has to do, and I saw that there was a comment about how at $250 per square foot, that should come to about $20 million, not $63 million. I do understand why that is. Why would replacing HVAC and bringing it up to code be so expensive, so much more than what you might expect? And I think the answer really just revolves around the sheer volume of work that we're facing. When we talk about replacing the HVAC, for example, it isn't like in your house just changing out the furnace. All of the distribution, the piping for the radiant heat, the ductwork and piping for the cooling is corroded out because of age and because of how the system was operated decades ago. And because of that corrosion, we actually have to go into the walls and replace all of the pieces of the system throughout the entire building. So it's like if you had to go in your house and replace all of the ductwork, take out all of the walls and replace all the ductwork everywhere, or put in a split system where you're running new ductwork, but now it's awkward and it doesn't quite fit. And this is just one particular issue. In addition to that, as we do look at the HVAC, our climate action resilience plan requires that we remove natural gas as an option and go to an all-electric system. So that also really forces a change in the type of HVAC that we are doing.
So there's a follow-up question about whether or not that includes consideration of tax credits and Department of Energy grants.
It does not yet include consideration of tax credits and Department of Energy grants. We have been looking at those types of things. The tax credits would help us, but you have to, the city is not a taxpayer. We do not naturally have the ability to take advantage of preservation tax credits. It can be done, but the purpose of tax credits are to put it in, take a historic building and do an adaptive reuse so that we put it into an income generating building, which the government is not. So there are options for how you can partner with the developer, similar to how District 65 is using an alternate funding method in lease certificates, where they partner with a third party who helps fund the upfront cost, and then they pay that back over time through a leasing option. We can do the same thing for the Civic Center, but in doing so, we would not really be able to get the full value of the tax credits. In addition, the state of Illinois also has preservation tax credits. Those are competitive. And again, the purpose is to put historic buildings back on the tax rolls, and so that they're paying property tax and generating income. And of course, that's not our situation. So we do not think it would be a good option for state of Illinois tax credits. The preservation tax credits do not are not stackable with environmental sustainability type tax credits.
Differs from doing this in a home.
So there's another question. Running new home run-ins for HVAC, water, electric isn't different from building new, just that the envelope already exists. Why is this problematic? Well, the envelope exists and it's been historically landmarked. So we have to preserve the envelope as it is. But in addition, a home is a residential use that is subject to residential building codes. We are definitely not a residential use, and we are not subject to residential building codes. There's quite a lot of significant requirements, particularly around things like fire safety, that our building does not comply with. In addition, we have some very significant ADA challenges with the building. The ADA alone was estimated at $3 to $5 million for just addressing ADA issues. So when we talk about each thing just being a little thing that needs to be addressed, that's true, but there are a lot of little things. Everything from the way that the restrooms are laid out to wanting to provide better security because it is a government building, to making sure that we follow the climate action resilience plan and that we address all ADA issues really add up. And so we're not saying that isn't a desirable option. That hasn't really been decided if we're doing that or not doing that. Also considering that the existing building is about 50 to 80% too large. And so any work that we do, we're doing in a much larger facility than if we were to get a new facility that we would actually use. Also feeds into the cost seeming larger than it should be for a renovation.
So what we'd like to do, and I know there's a couple more follow-ups yet, and perhaps we can get to those later, but what we'd like to do first is to invite those that are online to participate in the Zoom room, in the chat, and talk about priorities of spending. So in terms of a new city hall or a renovated city hall, compared to some of these other options that you see in front of you, if we could have those of you that are online, we'll put you into the chat room and get you to think through that a little bit and come back in about 15 minutes and report to us. So we appreciate you being part of that and participating, and thank you. And we're going to put you into a Zoom room in just a second. Are we there? We're there. All right. So you can unmute yourself and have a discussion about this relative sharing. And we'll do that till about 10 minutes to 7. And then we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much.
Or the, oh yeah. We can see the screen. You know, but I had-
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Chris.
Is everyone back?
Yes, everybody should be back. We want to thank you for participating in that. Let's just ask, did you all pick a reporter, and would one of you like to volunteer to unmute and tell us what the group decided? Raise your hand if that was you, and we'll unmute you from here. Anybody?
So we're supposed to unmute?
Yeah, if we'd like for one of you that was part of the discussion to unmute and tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the exercise and how you prioritized.
Well, I could do that if you want me to.
Thank you for volunteering.
All right.
Go ahead. Thanks.
I don't know how the others would feel, but there was some talk that the the other places, the library and the other buildings, would actually take a great deal more than was said to rehab them. And perhaps people could look again. I know you don't want to look again at having the city hall on Ridge revamped. The other thought is that the fire and the police would also be extremely expensive and could be, I don't know, could run the cost very high. The priorities are, I guess the priorities were parking and having a space, maybe a space around the building. But the main focus was on costs, the costs of doing the rehab of City Hall were felt on Ridge were felt to be overdone.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
So I appreciate that sentiment. When we did get the numbers back from AECom, we looked at a number of studies that were done in 1997 and early 2000s. And then we used a construction index to escalate those costs to be the equivalent of modern day, similar to an inflation index, but related to construction. And we did find that the costs were fairly similar. Particularly if you took into account there were 17 more years of deterioration without having done any of the rehab work necessary.
Yeah.
So in that way, we did try to vet them.
Okay, one problem was that the members of the city voted to keep the city hall, and then the apparently the city didn't keep it up. So you,
There was a referendum question about whether or not to keep the city hall, and majority of people in the city voted at that time to keep the city hall. But there was a similar question on that referendum about investing the money necessary to maintain the city hall. That was narrowly defeated. And so the city council, I think, was unwilling to invest significant dollars. There was no advocacy really for the public to continue to improve it. And unfortunately, that led us to a situation where if it was deteriorated significantly in 1997 and we haven't done any substantial work other than replace the roof, as you
yeah.
can imagine, it hasn't gotten better. I'm smiling because I think these are all really pertinent discussions, and I agree that these are things worth talking about. I'm not smiling because the situation's amusing. The situation is unfortunately very serious. I'll turn it back to Michael.
Okay. I'll facilitate then. At this point, what we'd like to do is to let you know, I'm going to try and advance the slide. Maybe. No, not from this screen. If there are other comments or questions that people have, we're certainly invite you to continue to put those in the chat. If you have not, there is a poll that is online that is available from the city website. It's not going to be open much longer, but if you haven't done it yet, you'd like to do it from your phone, you can scan the QR code here, or you can use this link that's right here. Again, if you don't do it right now, you can certainly do it from the city's website. So with that, unless there are other comments from the panel that's here, there's actually several of us, what we'd like to do is thank you for your time and ask you to keep up with what's going on. We're going to be putting together a summary of the feedback that we got from the community in terms of these questions that we talked about tonight and the poll that's on your screen there. And we'll be presenting it to the city council at an upcoming meeting. I invite you to check the agendas to see when that's there. And I think that we've gotten a lot of feedback from those of you that have joined us tonight. I want to thank you one more time for that. And we'll wish you a good night and thank you for your participation. Oh, sorry, there's a question for Laura. One final question and then we'll say goodnight to everybody. Sorry, I didn't see it.
Oh, okay. So there is one other question. Who is supposed to be managing the maintenance? Isn't this really serial deferred maintenance? That why we're here again. Let's do it right now, this time. I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll down and get to the bottom of it. Oh, this is the will of the people. That's great. I think that I have tried in my time as city engineer to highlight a lot of the challenges, particularly in the last few years, to really try to define problems in a way that people can understand how those challenges with our buildings and parks fit in with the big picture. I'm all about doing it right. I was not city engineer or even in the engineering group that had anything to do with the Civic Center for most of my career, so I can't really comment on that. I think that the comments are appropriate, though, that it is really important to try to figure the most cost-effective way that gets to the best value as defined by the needs shared by the residents of Evanston.
One more question that I know we don't have an answer to yet is what will happen to the property currently used for the police station?
What will happen? So that is a very good question also, and not something that we have made any decisions on. We have certainly are aware that that property is a really good location for redevelopment into something because it's on the edges of our downtown area. But we have had zero discussions. We barely had any discussions internally, because, much less had any real discussion with the public or the city council. So I don't think that that is something that is determined. One thing that we really looked at in the study and has been really key in the way that we've tried to approach things, is the importance of making sure that we are not net removing property from the tax rolls. Our goal with all of this is to be very cognizant that at worst, we should be neutral in terms of removing property or putting property on the tax rolls. And ideally, what would be great is if somehow we got to the place where more property were on the tax rolls than when we started. But having said that, I think that as long as we don't remove extra property from the tax rolls, that has been a key goal of this project. And to that end, to be determined on what happens on the police site.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your input. We wish you a lovely evening, and that's going to conclude our event for tonight. So have a good night, everybody.